taking the Era 2 out of the box for the first time, I was pretty taken back by how nice the whole exterior looks. Now the wood panel has a nice finish and I'm really liking the charcoal color more in person than in pictures. This modern home design aesthetic is an area that I feel like Fractal, they're really leading over the competition in the PC space. I don't really feel like there's anyone else making cases on a consistent basis that look as approachable as what Fractal's doing. Now the finish on the metal and the wood are incredibly smooth, and they've also added this sculpted design across the front and the sides, which gives it a very organic or a natural look, and I personally really like it. It's on the larger side for small form factor standards at 19 liters, but because it's still pretty narrow and tall, it fits nicely on a small desk. Now the outer shell comes off as one piece, which you unlock by removing this dust filter from the bottom. This piece actually feels really cheap compared to the rest of the case. It is just a dust filter, so it's not that big of a deal in my opinion, but it does just kind of feel out of character compared to the rest of the case so far. From there, you can slide the whole shell off the top. I would say of all the cases that I've tested using this, panelless outer shell approach, this is the easiest to get in and out of. But all of these are less convenient than a traditional side panel. Now from a distance, this almost gives you the illusion that it's a single unibody piece, but once you start looking a little bit closer, the seams start to show. So this outer shell is made of metal and plastic pieces that are fixed together. And because of that, you can start to see the panel gaps along the sides, and on my unit here, the gaps are pretty uneven and they're slightly misaligned in places. Now that might be considered a nitpick, but this is an over $200 case, so I really feel like it's worth pointing out. Now the ventilated wood top panel is held in by a few magnets and that's removable. Mine is looking perfectly fine, no cracks in the wood or anything like that. It's also reinforced with metal on the other side, which I think this is a really great idea to prevent warping from, heat over time. Taking a look on the inside, at the bottom here, you can see that there's actually two 120mm fans already pre-installed. This will definitely help with the airflow, and I'm really glad that they're included because while there is some ventilation in the outer shell, there's really not much, and I really doubt that it would be enough on its own. And including these two fans, it guarantees that everybody who purchases this case will get active airflow from the bottom. That's a huge win in my opinion, and it really shows that they're putting that extra care and effort and making sure that the thermals are acceptable in this one. Now, most of the construction on the inside is metal. It feels solid, so no issues there, but the entire bottom piece is made of thick plastic. Plastic is being used in other areas as well, and I'm not against the use of plastic or anything like that. But for a $200 case, I would have liked to seen everything exterior, including this bottom piece, be made of something higher quality. The more interesting thing about this case is all of the small conveniences that they designed into making it much easier and a much more enjoyable build process. Starting off, this is a sandwich style layout. Nothing new about that, but just like the Terra, we do have an adjustable spine. This is adjusted at 4 points, 2 on the back panel and then 2 on the front, with 3 numbered positions. And I really like that they've added these bumps in between so you don't accidentally have the center misaligned or anything like that. It's not as freeform as the adjustable center in some other cases, but it is a more approachable and understandable design. Now, the reason somebody would want to adjust the center in the first place is to better utilize the internal space. Now, adjusting this allows you to prioritize CPU or GPU clearance depending on what your needs are. So now let's actually take a look at what it's like to build in this case. I'm going to be using a Ryzen 9 7950X3D. That's going to be plugged into a Gigabyte B650i Aorus Ultra motherboard, and I've got 32 gigs of DDR5 6000 RAM from Corsair. So we can make it easier to work in here by detaching the radiator bracket. On either side, there are these latches that can be pulled towards the motherboard side. That unlocks it, and you can just pop it off. I love these small conveniences like this. These toolless, time-saving features, they really add up, and there's quite a few similar things in this case. On the left-hand side, this is where the power supply is gonna go. We can actually remove that bracket with a single screw, and from there, the bracket is actually on a rail that just slides on and off. And already, we're ready to start moving our components in. So let's drop in the motherboard and secure it with a few screws. All of the case I/O is already pre-routed as well. So that's another little convenience, and let's plug those in while we're here, along with the riser cable. So don't forget about the basement fans. The wiring for those is actually on the GPU side, so you'll have to route those yourself. It would have been really cool if they had taken the same extra step that they did for the case I/O and added an extension that routed to the motherboard so that you don't have to mess up these neatly tied cables. That's not something I've seen other cases do, but with all of the little conveniences baked in here, that would have made it even better. Okay, so flipping over to the other side, they added a cage here for a few hard drives if you want to use that. This is a great use of the space under the GPU, and it's also on the same type of rail system that the power supply was. Now for the GPU, I'm going to be using a 4070 Ti Super. This is a 3-slot card, 305mm in length, but like I mentioned earlier, you can fit up to a 3.1 slot card, 326mm in length. And to make it easier to install those longer cards, there's a cutout on the front for the GPU just to kind of pass through so that you can position the card. So flipping back to the motherboard side, we can start installing the power supply. This is the new Corsair SF1000. These updated 2024 versions just came out about 2 or so months ago at the time I'm filming this, but I feel like we've been waiting on this update forever, and I'm so happy that we finally have them. Some quick context, the SF750 has been a go-to power supply for a while now. It's platinum rated, includes braided cables, and now with the 2024 revisions, we have a new look, which I think looks a little more modern, these smaller Type 5 connectors, which is gonna help with cable management, and best of all, we have 750, 850, and 1000 watt options. It's really good timing too, because who knows if 750 watts will cut it for the higher end 50 series cards? Probably not. Now, once that power supply bracket is secured, the angled extension cable is already routed as well, so let's just plug that in and make sure the switch is toggled on. I really like that the power supply is installed upside down here. This is something I've only seen in one other case, and I think it's a really smart idea, because not only do we have easy access to all the connections so that we can plug in our power cables and route them to the components, but it also prevents the cables from getting into the fans at the bottom. However, now they're just gonna go into the fans connected to the radiator, so I would highly recommend picking up some fan grills off Amazon. Now, it's still pretty tight in here for cable management, so I'm just gonna do my best to route it around the motherboard here, but you know, it's all gonna be covered up anyway, so just mostly wanna focus on not letting them get caught into the basement fans or anything like that. Okay, the last step here is the AIO. I'm gonna be using the Fractal Lumen S24. I like using this one when you could be potentially limited on CPU clearance. The block height on this cooler has a much lower profile than most other AIOs, because on this one, the pump is actually moved into the radiator. So I'm gonna install those fan grills and then secure the bracket from the case to the top of the radiator. Now, with the top of the case completely open like this, it does make it really easy to lower the radiator on top. You just gotta make sure you get all those cables out of the way, and then the bracket should just click and secure right back on. Now, the last thing to do here is to install the cooler. This one just uses the default brackets that are on the motherboard, but if you're using a different cooler than me, you'll want to make sure that you install any of the necessary hardware before installing your motherboard if it's needed. Now, with the fans and the pump plugged in, that's the build complete. So first, let's test some CPU thermals with Cinebench 2024. Now, this is a worst case scenario for the CPU, so we should expect higher temperatures here than on a gaming workload. Now, after a 10-minute multi-core stress test, I'm seeing the 7950X3D temps. They max out around 87.5 degrees, but they're averaging at nearly 85. Testing out Blackmyth Wukong, 1440p at cinematic settings with DLSS and frame generation off. The CPU is at 55 degrees and the GPU 65 degrees, pulling 277 watts. But that's a more GPU intensive game, so jumping into the finals at 1440p, highest settings, the CPU is around 71 degrees and the GPU settling in at around 58. Now, one more game for good measure, Ghost of Tsushima, 1440p ultra settings with DLSS and frame generation off. I'm seeing the GPU around 62 degrees. As far as fan noise goes, I'm measuring 43 to 44 decibels. I'm not noticing any loud pitch noises or anything annoying like that. It's a lower wind noise, similar to like an air purifier. So it looks like they took what they learned from the Terra with the adjustable spine to give some flexibility, added some really nice quality of life improvements to the build process. With the way I have it configured here, the thermals look good, noise levels are tolerable, and subjectively, I think it's a really nice design. The biggest downsides, I would say, are the fit and finish and the price. Now, I can understand this isn't gonna have the level of perfection as an actual unibody shell, like what you would see in the Z18 or the Nanook, but still, at $200, I would expect the pieces to be better aligned, especially when there's less expensive ITX cases that don't have those quality control issues. With those critiques aside, overall, there's very little to complain about. It's an excellent case.